When it comes to catching Burmese pythons, it takes more than just a sharp eye. They're sneaky, slippery, and hard to spot. But now wildlife teams have a new snake hunting tool in their arsenal: robot bunnies.
Florida did something no one expected. In the middle of the Everglades, a place already struggling under one of the worst invasive species crises in America, the state released hundreds of robotic rabbits. These weren't toy machines or simple trackers. They were designed to give off heat, carry scent, and move just enough to fool a Burmese python, an apex predator that has already wiped out as much as 90% of small mammals in parts of the region, according to studies published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Just a few hours after deployment, one of the robots sent an emergency signal. Its thermal sensors had detected a long, heavy shape moving directly toward it. That moment proved the robots worked as bait, but it also revealed something else. Each machine carried instruments designed to record what happened next, and the first wave of data forced researchers to rethink their entire strategy against these silent hunters. The Everglades was never meant to fight a battle like this. For decades, scientists have warned that the wetlands were slipping into a silent collapse, and at the center of that collapse is a predator that does not belong here. Burmese pythons, once kept as pets and later released or scattered by events like Hurricane Andrew, spread through the swamps with shocking speed. Unlike native species, they have no natural enemies in Florida. Nothing hunts them, nothing slows them down, and nothing stops them from turning one of America's most unique ecosystems into their personal hunting ground. Their impact became impossible to ignore. Field studies showed that small mammals, including rabbits, raccoons, foxes, and opossums, had dropped by as much as 90% in certain regions. In some areas, researchers driving at night reported seeing almost no native wildlife at all, only the long, dark outline of snakes crossing the road. Every year, the pythons grew larger, spread farther, and reproduced faster. A single female could lay dozens of eggs at a time, sometimes close to 100, giving the species a level of population growth that quickly outran every effort to contain it. Florida responded with every traditional method available. The state encouraged residents to report sightings, launched public hunting events, and even created bounty systems that rewarded people for removing pythons from the wild. Thousands of participants joined the effort, but the numbers told a different story. For every python caught, many more remained hidden in the thick sawgrass and endless marshes. The terrain itself became the enemy. The Everglades covers more than 1 million acres of waterlogged ground, making it almost impossible for humans to track anything consistently. Even trained hunters often went an entire day without seeing a single snake. Specialized teams were brought in, including biologists who implanted radio trackers into captured pythons, hoping these Judas snakes would lead them to nesting sites. The strategy worked in small pockets, but it could not keep up with the scale of the problem. Florida even trained detection dogs, whose noses were far more reliable than human eyesight. They helped identify breeding females and egg clutches, marking a rare moment of success. Still, there were too few dogs and too much land. Every victory felt temporary. By the early 2020s, state officials and wildlife experts had to accept a hard truth. The python population was not shrinking, it was expanding. Every year, the predators pushed deeper into protected areas, and every year the native animals grew fewer and fewer. Florida was losing, and unless something entirely different emerged, something no one had tried before, the Everglades was going to slip beyond saving. That was the moment when an unusual idea began to take shape, an idea strange enough to change the course of the fight. For years, people assumed the Burmese python invasion in Florida was a mystery born from nature. But the truth is far more uncomfortable because the Everglades didn't create this predator, humans did. The first pythons that appeared in the wild weren't explorers or runaways from a distant ecosystem. They were pets. During the late 20th century, Burmese pythons became popular in the exotic pet trade. Many owners bought them when they were only a few inches long, unaware that these snakes could grow over 15 feet, weigh more than 100 pounds, and live for decades. When the responsibility became overwhelming, some owners made the worst possible choice. They released them into the wetlands. That alone was enough to plant the seeds of a future crisis. But everything changed in 1992 when Hurricane Andrew, one of the most destructive storms in Florida's history, tore through South Dade County. Among the buildings it destroyed were several breeding facilities for exotic reptiles. Concrete walls collapsed, cages shattered, and dozens of adult pythons escaped directly into the surrounding wilderness. With a single storm, a handful of scattered pets turned into the foundation of a breeding population. From that moment on, the Everglades had a new apex predator, one no one had prepared for. The ecosystem itself accelerated the disaster. The Everglades offered the snakes everything they needed: warm temperatures year-round, hundreds of square miles of secluded habitat, and an endless supply of native prey. Unlike Southeast Asia, where pythons face tigers, monitor lizards, and other natural threats, Florida offered virtually no predators capable of controlling them. A single female could lay dozens of eggs at a time, sometimes close to 100, allowing the population to grow exponentially. And because the landscape is so dense and difficult to navigate, most snakes went unnoticed as they reproduced generation after generation. By the time scientists realized what was happening, the invasion was already decades in the making. Small mammals had begun to disappear, sightings of pythons became more frequent, and the number of snakes found in the wild each year hinted at a population far larger than anyone had predicted. What looked like a sudden outbreak was actually the delayed impact of human choices accumulating over time. Florida didn't inherit the python problem, it created it. Through the pet trade, through accidental release, and through years of underestimating how quickly a non-native species could reshape an entire ecosystem. And once a problem reaches this scale, one question becomes unavoidable. If humans open the door for these snakes, are they capable of closing it again? To understand why Florida's fight against Burmese pythons seemed doomed from the start, you have to picture the Everglades the way wildlife trackers see it. From above, it looks open and endless, but on the ground it's a maze of sawgrass, water channels, tree islands, mangroves, and hidden pockets of mud that can swallow a person waist-deep with a single misstep. Every step is slow, every direction looks the same, and the moment you lose your bearings, the landscape folds in on you like a giant green labyrinth. Trying to search this terrain manually is almost impossible. Even with airboats, drones, or teams of trained specialists, most of the Everglades remains inaccessible. Large sections are flooded year-round. Others are covered in vegetation so thick that visibility drops to just a few feet. Sound doesn't travel far either, swallowed by the wind and tall grass. A python hiding under 2 inches of water can be just inches away from a person and still go completely undetected. It isn't just camouflage. It's an environment built to help predators disappear. The snakes take full advantage of it. Burmese pythons are mostly nocturnal, which means their most active hunting hours begin when the sun sets and human crews are forced to retreat. At night, temperatures drop, fog settles over the water, and the Everglades becomes even harder to navigate. A python can travel long distances under the cover of darkness, leaving almost no trace behind. By morning, it's already curled up under a root system or buried in thick reeds, invisible again even from a few feet away. Tracking them with night vision gear or thermal cameras helps only slightly. The heat from the water and the dense vegetation can hide or blur a python's outline, making detection unreliable. Radio-tagged snakes sometimes led researchers to clusters of other pythons, but even then, the teams often arrived too late. The snakes had moved on, slipping into deeper sections of the swamp where human access is limited or impossible. This constant vanishing act made traditional wildlife management useless. Every method required people to physically find the snakes, but the terrain was designed to protect predators, not reveal them. Biologists and field teams realized they were fighting an enemy that controlled the battlefield. As long as the strategy depended on humans locating pythons first, Florida would always be at a disadvantage. But what if the battlefield could be shifted? What if the goal wasn't to find the python at all? As frustration grew and solutions ran thin, a new idea quietly formed among researchers. If the Everglades made it impossible to hunt pythons effectively, then perhaps the answer was simpler than anyone expected. If humans couldn't find the snakes, maybe the snakes needed to find something else instead. Long before anyone imagined robotic rabbits crawling through the Everglades, researchers tried something far more primitive and controversial. They placed live marsh rabbits inside protective enclosures and monitored how Burmese pythons reacted. It wasn't designed to harm the rabbits, the cages were built to prevent direct contact, but the experiment revealed something scientists had only suspected before. Pythons were drawn in with startling accuracy. They locked onto the heat signatures, followed scent trails, and approached the cages even when they were hidden deep within the thickest parts of the swamp. The results were undeniable. In some test sites, more than 20 pythons approached the same general area over the course of just a few weeks. For scientists who had spent years struggling to locate even a handful of snakes, the discovery was a breakthrough. The animals weren't just attracted to movement, they were responding to temperature cues, scent markers, and subtle biological signals that had evolved over millions of years. For the first time, researchers had proof that pythons could be manipulated, guided, and possibly lured out of hiding. But the success of the experiment came with a problem. Using live bait, even protected, unharmed bait, sparked a wave of backlash from animal welfare groups. Critics argued that the setup was stressful for the rabbits and ethically questionable, even if the animals were never physically harmed. The debate escalated quickly, and under pressure, the program was suspended. What remained was a data set that quietly reshaped the entire conversation. Behind the scenes, scientists realized they had something priceless. The experiment had taught them exactly what pythons responded to: heat, scent, and the illusion of vulnerable prey. These signals were powerful enough to override the snake's natural caution and pull them toward a specific point in the environment. It was the closest thing Florida had ever come to a reliable python attractant. The question now wasn't whether pythons could be lured, it was whether the lure could be created without using a living animal. Teams began brainstorming new approaches, sketching ideas that sounded more like science fiction than wildlife management. What if they could build a bait that produced heat without a heartbeat? What if scent could be synthesized and released in controlled intervals? What if movement could be simulated just enough to convince a python that prey was nearby? The concept seemed strange at first, unnatural, even unsettling. But the need was urgent, and the Everglades was running out of time. Every failed method had pushed researchers closer to a solution no one expected to consider. From the lessons learned in those early controversial trials, a new idea took shape. A lure that couldn't suffer, couldn't be stressed, and couldn't die. A lure built from metal, wiring, and sensors. A lure that would become the first prey that feels no pain. When the idea of building artificial prey first surfaced, it sounded like a desperate thought experiment, the kind of concept researchers mention in passing but never actually pursue. Yet the more the teams at the University of Florida and the South Florida Water Management District studied the data from earlier trials, the more the idea began to feel possible. They didn't need a perfect replica of a marsh rabbit. They only needed something that could mimic the signals a python cared about most. That challenge brought together an unusual partnership of engineers, biologists, fabric designers, and wildlife specialists. For months, they worked out of labs filled with prototypes that looked nothing like animals, just metal frames wrapped in wires and heat pads. Their task was deceptively simple on paper, but incredibly complex in practice. Create a device that gave off the warmth of a small mammal, carried the scent pythons used to track prey, and moved just enough to trigger a predator's curiosity without wasting energy. Heat was the first requirement. Engineers built an internal system that radiated warmth at the same temperature range as a marsh rabbit's body. Next came scent. Wildlife biologists developed a synthetic mixture modeled after real rabbit odor, a blend that would disperse slowly and remain stable in the humid wetlands. Movement was the hardest element to get right. The robot didn't need to hop or run, but it needed subtle cues, small shifts, soft vibrations, patterns that mimicked the presence of life without revealing the machine underneath. Once those components were ready, the next step was intelligence. The team integrated motion-activated cameras that would begin recording the moment something approached. They added pressure sensors, temperature monitors, and a small communication module powered by solar cells. If a python came near the robot, the data would be transmitted back to researchers in seconds. The machine wasn't just bait. It was a field scout designed to track a predator that almost never allowed itself to be tracked. The final prototypes were covered in weather-resistant coatings, designed to survive days or even weeks in wet terrain. When the first complete model was placed on the workbench, it didn't look entirely alive, but it didn't need to. This wasn't meant for human eyes. It was meant for a python's instincts. Standing around the table, the team members were divided between excitement and uncertainty. They had built something new, something clever, something that might finally shift the fight in Florida's favor. But the real test would come only after the robots were placed in the wild. The question hung over the room like a challenge. Would a python believe in the bait? The real test began when researchers finally placed the first 120 robotic rabbits across several python hotspots in the Everglades. These weren't random locations. Each spot had a history of python sightings, nesting behavior, or unexplained declines in native wildlife. The robots were carried in waterproof cases, set into position just before dusk, and activated one by one. The moment the team stepped away, the Everglades swallowed them in silence. No one expected results that same night. Pythons are notoriously cautious, and researchers assumed it would take days before any snake wandered near the prototypes. Instead, the first signal arrived within hours. A pressure sensor on one of the robots detected a sudden change. Then a thermal signature appeared in the data feed. Something long and warm-blooded was approaching the device with a slow, deliberate crawl. When the movement pattern was analyzed, it matched the typical approach behavior of a hunting python. Another signal followed, then another. Before long, several robots scattered across different locations began transmitting alerts. Python movement toward the devices happened much faster than the team had predicted. The snakes were reacting to the robots almost exactly as they reacted to real prey. Heat, scent, faint vibrations. Together they formed a lure strong enough to pull predators out of hiding. For the first time, pythons were revealing themselves without being chased. Camera modules activated each time the sensors picked up activity. The footage wasn't dramatic or cinematic. In most cases, it was just the shapes of large snakes moving cautiously around the robots. But for researchers, these were the clearest behavioral cues they had ever captured. The robots recorded angles of approach, speed, body posture, and even the distances at which pythons first reacted to the bait. This was information that no field team, no matter how skilled, could gather consistently in the wild. As the data accumulated, analysts loaded the positional information into tracking software. That's when something unexpected began to appear. The robots weren't just showing where individual snakes were. They were revealing patterns. Routes pythons preferred, areas they avoided, and narrow corridors of land that acted like invisible highways through the swamp. The more points that appeared on the screen, the clearer the picture became. It was as if the Everglades, a place that had always hidden its predators, was suddenly exposing its secrets in bright lines and clusters of movement. Researchers leaned closer to the monitors, realizing they were seeing something no field study had ever produced. A map that was not random, a map shaped by the pythons themselves. And what that map suggested made the entire team stop what they were doing. Something about the way the snakes were moving didn't match what anyone expected. As the data from the robotic rabbits poured in, the map on the researchers' screens began to transform into something far more detailed than they ever imagined. What had started as a collection of scattered sensor alerts slowly connected into patterns, curves, clusters, and pathways that traced the hidden movements of Burmese pythons across the Everglades. For years, scientists knew the snakes were spreading, but they had never seen the shape of that spread until now. Certain locations lit up repeatedly. These hotspots weren't random. They were places where pythons returned again and again, sometimes within hours of their last detection. The clustering hinted at high traffic routes, places where snakes moved between feeding grounds, resting areas, and deeper sections of the swamp. In several sites, the robots revealed something even more critical: new nesting zones that had gone completely undetected. These were patches of land where breeding females gathered, areas that earlier ground surveys had overlooked because they were nearly impossible to access on foot. The map changed what researchers thought they knew. Instead of wandering unpredictably, the snakes seemed to follow narrow corridors that acted like hidden highways across the wetlands. Understanding those routes could allow wildlife teams to intercept snakes before they spread farther. It was the closest Florida had ever come to predicting python behavior rather than reacting to it. But while the data was groundbreaking, it exposed a new problem. Every dot on that map came from just one of the 120 robotic rabbits. If Florida wanted a complete picture, one that covered the entire Everglades, they wouldn't need hundreds of robots. They would need thousands, and each robot came with a price tag of around $4,000, not including maintenance, field deployment, or the specialized equipment required to monitor the signals. The harsh swamp environment made matters worse. Constant humidity, heat, and acidic water meant that some prototypes degraded quickly and needed repair. Scaling the system wasn't as simple as ordering more units. The deeper researchers dug into the calculations, the more complicated the math became. How much would it cost to build and deploy enough robots to track a population of snakes that might number in the tens of thousands? How many teams would be needed to maintain a network that stretched across more than 1 million acres of unpredictable terrain? The robots worked, but they worked at a price. Standing in front of the expanding map, the scientists realized they had reached a crossroads. For the first time, they had a tool that could expose the python invasion with remarkable clarity. Yet the clearer the picture became, the more they saw how massive the challenge truly was. And the question hanging over the entire operation was no longer scientific. It was practical, political, and financial. If Florida wanted to win this war, how high would the cost be? And who was willing to pay it? In the end, the robotic rabbits gave Florida something it had never truly had before: a glimpse into the hidden world of the Burmese python. For years, the Everglades felt like a battlefield fought in the dark, with humans guessing where the snakes might be, hoping to get ahead of an invasion that seemed to grow faster every season. The robots changed that. They illuminated the invisible paths, revealed new nesting zones, and proved that pythons could be drawn out rather than chased. It was the first sign of hope in a fight that had dragged on for decades. Yet every step forward revealed a new challenge. The success of the robots came with a price, literally. Building them was expensive. Maintaining them in the harsh, unforgiving wetlands was even harder. And scaling the program to the level needed to cover the entire Everglades required resources far beyond what early trials had imagined. Each breakthrough introduced another question. How many robots were enough? How often would they need repairs? And what happened when the snakes adapted? There was also a deeper irony that researchers could not ignore. Humans had engineered a technological solution to fight a threat rooted in human behavior. People released pythons into the wild. People allowed the problem to grow unchecked. And now, people were building machines to clean up the damage. It raised a larger question about whether innovation could truly fix the consequences of past decisions, or whether the Everglades would always be trapped between natural resilience and human mistakes. As the field teams reviewed the maps and weighed the costs, one truth became clear. Florida's battle was no longer just against a snake. It was against the limits of funding, manpower, technology, and time. Whether robotic rabbits became the future of wildlife control or just a temporary tool depended on what came next. So what do you think? Is this a bold leap forward or a complicated stopgap before an even larger disaster unfolds? Share your thoughts below, and if you want to explore more hidden stories shaping our world, make sure to subscribe to MindGap.